Great day in the morning. This is Jonathan with the Gamemasters Soapbox. I'm your host and Game Master with almost 50 years behind this screen. And today we're going to talk about something the Game Masters don't like talking about, and that are the 7 deadly sins of being a storyteller. Now, games mastery as a skill or an art form takes many turns during its evolution, and as a storyteller advances over time, he has to be fearful of a bunch of different accusations or realities. And I use the term accuracies or irregularities or accusations because sometimes they actually are at fault for these things, and other times it's merely a perception. And really, it takes the actual participation to figure it out. So let's talk about them, shall we? The first one I've got mentioned up here is unbalanced and weighted gameplay. If you are sitting down to a table and your players do not trust your die rolls, they do not believe that what you are saying in terms of story is accurate, you have no credibility, and your players will cease to play. They simply won't show up any longer. And unweighted gameplay or unbalanced gameplay comes down to a couple of different leverage points. In one case, the unbalancing occurs before you ever play, and that is where either you over or underestimate the strengths and powers of your players. This concept that you are playing in an unbalanced arena generally is not something that happens in a single session. In other words, you can have a bad time and have a really horrendous combat situation that is either clearly not going the way you intended and clearly not in the area where the players can do anything about it, but it can be a situation where you've misjudged. And furthermore, it can be weighted improperly if you intentionally leverage the numbers on the player's side or the monster's side to make it go a direction. And this perception, therefore, is really what's important. If you are watching your players, in an example of about a week or two ago, I had a game session where every player on both on every part of the team was blowing the die rolls. Man, my lights are off. Pardon me. That's way too dark.
Yeah, let me get the right one of these days.
There we go. Don't know what that was about. Anyway, if the situation is such that the players are rolling simply badly, we had a situation where we had more than 20 rolls that didn't go above a 12, and it was just, observationally, it was exactly what it seemed to be, but just a series of bad strokes of luck all clumped together. But that is not what I'm talking about. When I talk about unbalanced gameplay or weighted gameplay, this is something that's endemic over session after session, and your players are aware of the challenges that are going on and simply see you as adjusting or improperly setting it up. If it's unbalanced, if it's weighted in some fashion, either for the players or against them, they will notice this and they will respond. And there are reasons. There are reasons why a game master might do this. One reason might be he feels like he's been particularly strong-arming recently and is trying to get out of that sequence by puffing up the confidence of the players by making his numbers irregularly low or whatever. Or perhaps he hasn't felt like he's making connection with the players, and so he's going to push the numbers to make sure that they work out well. In both these cases, the situation feels false. It doesn't feel like you're playing with the real destiny die roll whims of fate that they normally do, and players will respond. So it is dangerous and unwise to increase or to leverage the numbers, put your thumb on the scale, so to speak. A second problem that game masters will have, and again, these all are situations that can come out of intention or accident initially, but you can restrict or limit players' agency in a game. And that is the most clear example of this is when a player says, I want to do thus and such, and you just simply say no. Restricting or limiting player agency means you're taking the players out of the equation and just telling a story. And if you're going to do that, you might as well write a novel. Instead, if you are looking for player agency to be a part of your story and want the play experience to be as fulfilling as possible, you have to keep your hands off of their capabilities or agencies. One of the easiest way to do this is to actually broaden and expand your idea of what a player can do by giving them more options or learning there's a process used in improvisational humor called yes and, wherein the decisions of one person are accepted as valid and the story just turns in a new direction based on that. So the yes and gets rid of a lot of the restriction and limitations that players perceive. But again, these can happen for a variety of reasons. Perhaps you have a player who has gone half-cocked in the past and is being problematic, and so you're trying to quell that. Maybe you've turned the squelch up a little bit and you're actually interfering with everyone to be seen as being equitable, and in the process you're limiting or restricting what the players want to do, and you're just making the game unfun. Realizing that restriction and limitation are not useful tools, instead try to couch your questions to the players in a fashion where their answers will fit more cleanly into this action or that action. And again, these are skills that you develop over time. I've got a class in my Game Mastery series that goes over this in particular on how to play improvisationally. But the idea here is that you want to get so that your restrictions and limitations, if they exist, are done at such a level that they don't interfere with what the players choose, and instead you take certain of their choices off the table in the narrative. A third deadly sin is poor communication and engagement, and this is where the railroad, if you will, the concept of the linear storyline, A, evolved, and B, becomes so apparent that it's impossible for the players to do otherwise. If you are a poor communicator, if you don't have the ability to rephrase people's questions or restate their concerns in a way that they feel like you're hearing them, they're not going to respond. Or if you don't answer the question that they ask and instead answer a question they didn't ask, these kind of things are poor communication skills, and they cause a lack of involvement. If you ask a player an action and they respond with something that you don't think will work, you just simply say no and then ask for another one. This is the epitome of poor communication. You need to be able to engage your players not only in the actual narrative, but in the role play communications portion of the game. So acting as the NPCs and taking on those personas and roles increases your communication and it increases the engagement. But if the process becomes a monologue and you're doing exposition just in another way, you are failing at the communications aspect here, and you will put players off. So try to avoid improper use or uncertain use of vocabulary, but instead expand your knowledge and awareness of the kinds of terms you would need to be able to convey information to make this process easier. This next one is probably the most difficult to handle, and that's inconsistence and capriciousness in rulings. Of course, the word capricious is itself kind of fun, but the word capricious literally means to be like a goat. You're going to be bouncing around off the walls and not consistent. Inconsistency is a bugbear, if you will, to those who have patterns and themes and concepts. And one of the most common forms of inconsistency in a game master is your play system week over week. If you are having a really fun and silly adventure one week and the very next week is very dire and nerve-wracking and scary, and the players can't switch gears that fast, you have actually set up a unfavorable situation. We tend to work within the framework that we see, and when we see one framework and then we're asked to act in another way, we feel unnerved and don't want to continue to participate. So we start to back off. We start to question what we're doing, and the players they'll shy away if they're the inconsistency can cause the confusion level to go through the roof. Now, inconsistency also can fall in another way, and this is not what we're speaking of here. Inconsistency can mean you don't hold your session every week as you plan. Instead, you have a week that you run right, and the next week you're late, and the next week you don't host at all, and the next week you maybe host late or early again. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is inconsistency in the rulings. In other words, if a creature type is being affected by a weapons type, I'm using a slashing attack and it does really well one week. The next time we face the same monster, my slashing attack had better still work. The challenge is that when a game master decides that this isn't right, instead of coming up with an explanation for it, he simply makes a different judgment. And this capriciousness of the rulings, where it's yes, always this, but not in this case, or the fear factor of a dragon only affects a person if I wanted to, and then I pretend or change the ruling so that it doesn't. This capriciousness leads to bad feelings from the players and a doubt, and will cause them to not want to participate. If they can't put their feet down in the universe and stand on what they consider to be solid ground, they would rather not play than to drown in that. So just realize you have to be consistent, and this is where getting to know the game's mechanism you're using and use the same one week over week will help you with that. This next one starts off being subjective, and then in retrospect becomes objective, and that is when a player or when a game master utilizes favoritism, undue player focus, and bias for or against an individual or group of individuals in a game. This is the major problem in being a game master. And if you had to circle one of these as the one greatest danger you have as a player, as a game master, is that you might be showing favoritism, or you've been giving too much attention to one player over the others, or you're showing a clear bias against a group or individuals within your group, your play group. Favoritism is a natural response. If one person at the table really likes the information that you provide and they eat it up and they are playing back and forth with you, that great synergy, that great unique feel is that's still there. It's still going on. But if you give into that and you start to focus your attention on that one player, or cause other players to have to stand off on the side and wait till you resolve something that's going on with one player, or you let all the cool moments only fall into the group, the 2 or 3 people that you really hold fascinating, you're going to lose your players. Conversely, and I can tell you this one's from experience, and this one's deep-seated, and it hurts a lot to say this, sometimes you will endeavor to be someone else. Strigley, yes, welcome back. So yeah, that's a great question. I will get to that in a moment. Favoritism, if you're doing it, thanks. If you're looking at a player at your table and you're asking them for a response, and they immediately go into it, and you're completely in synergy with them, and you're getting a lot out of it, you almost need to set a timer. I have a dozen egg timers of various sizes. Sandglasses. Oops. In front of the camera, John. In front of the camera. So the sandglass, this one's a long one. This is 30 minutes. But I use the various sandglasses to keep track of things in game, so I know timing-wise when they should happen. And if I've got a player that I'm spending way too much time responding to, then I will use my egg timer to actually time myself so that the interaction doesn't stay too long. Now, when you talk about other players at the table who haven't said anything, I can give you another great example. We have in our Monday group, we have a player who has a speech impediment. He doesn't speak quickly or whatever, and therefore tries to resolve it. And you have to just be patient with that person. And the other players at the table sometimes act like I'm causing them to have to chew nails or whatever while they're waiting. But the issue is if that person has something that they want to say, you need to make sure you give them time to let it out. In reference to the very question of being asked, what if other players are quiet? Sometimes the quiet players are being quiet because they don't know enough or aren't comfortable enough getting to the point of presenting. Or maybe they are just enjoying the setting. And sometimes they just are wallpaper. And that's okay because everybody comes to the roleplay game for a different reason. But the reality is that I'm not talking about the setup of the scene. I'm talking about within the scene, if there is an opportunity for someone else to have an opinion, you need to turn and respond to their opinions in the game, even if it's not to ask them to be in the spotlight. I'm just referring to checking in with your players on a regular basis. And undue focus is when one player or maybe a couple have become seen as being in tune with you, and therefore you only get feedback from them instead of from the majority of players. So even if the check-in isn't to provide them some limelight, instead it's just simply to get a confirmation of where you are in the game to make sure you're not showing favoritism, that's a completely different issue. What I'm saying in that case is, hey, we're in this scene, you're standing over the side, is there anything particular you would like to do? No? Okay, great. We're going to continue with the conversation if you want. All right. If not, let me know. Because you want to get feedback from the players, not the characters. I'm not asking that the characters get the limelight. That's a different thing altogether. And so, yes, there are situations when a character, for example, someone who's playing a minstrel or a lore bringer or something, and they are intended to be the person that is a spokesperson, of course they will spending more time doing the speaking. Of course they'll be spending more airtime, if you will, doing their portion of the role play. Just realize that I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the undue focus on one person. So, for example, if 3 players are rolling dice to accomplish something, and you're using a classic die rolling system with only a single success fail option, and you've got 2 that succeed and 1 that fails, but you focus only on the one who succeeded that happens to be in your wheelhouse and who is clearly your favorite, if you only go to them for the response and you give them their information feedback first and you don't draw equal attention with the other one, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about undue favoritism, undue focus. And favoritism by itself is automatically a bias. You're already defining one player as having more value, and that's really what I'm talking about. Not whether or not you're being equitable. That's a separate thing. I hope that's understood. And this actually feeds into the next one. Lack of player input or collaboration. If you are a player at a table and the things you offer as recommendations or suggestions are rarely taken, you won't stay at the table very long, because the point of the role-play game experience is to be a part of the collective. What's this? Last group left the DM would make. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You need to not have that happen. You need to make sure that you are including equity. And I tell you, one of the reasons for this being a danger is not, ironically, it's not that you're giving up, you're not taking away player time from the rest of the players. It's the fact that you're advocating for behavior on the part of the player that is negative for that player's experience. And what I mean by that is, you have a person that you really like the way they play, so you feed into that. Pretty soon, they're taking up the majority of the conversations. the other players don't feel like they've got any input, and every time they ask you or recommend something, you rebuff them or turn it down or even refer them back to the original player saying if you did it more like he did, then this would be acceptable. These are all what I'm talking about. So that's what you need to not. You need to be aware of the issue of favoritism and then reconsider what you're doing with that one player. What is it that you're responding to? Because if it's the player, then maybe there's more going on there than what it seems to be, and maybe that needs to be addressed in another way. But the role play session needs to be each person getting an equitable turn in the game if they want it to work more collectively and for the communications to be more communal. As a matter of fact, when role-play games started, or as I used to say, back in my day, back when I was a youngster, the Gamemaster didn't actually talk to the group as a whole. Instead, he would pick one person to be the speaker, and then that speaker would be responsible with collecting the ideas of the players, having a conversation with them about what was going on, and then he would state it back. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And that's really the point that I'm trying to get at, is that a game master has to be checking in with the players, even in the case, as Strigley mentions here, of someone who's taking a nap. Even if you are talking about a character who's not on scene, every once in a while make a die roll to see whether or not the conversation has drawn his attention, or maybe he discovered he can't sleep, or maybe a dream woke him up. There's a lot of ways that you could reintegrate with that player without having to leave the main conversation and still give them a chance to feel like they're part of the story by letting them remember that you're aware of them in the game. So those are important. The final thing about lack of player input or collaboration, this is actually referring additionally to feedback you're getting between sessions where a player says, well, that last session was really a lot of combat. Is every session going to be like that? Can I find out if there's other options for communication that I could use? These are feedback loops that you need to be able to embrace and engage with. So a player who is feeling like he doesn't have an input at least should, at the end of a session, be able to say, for example, Strigley, you were there today. We had a conversation in our Sunday group, and Strigley was a guest there, and the players were all involved with a political conversation, and so they went back and forth on the minutiae of whether they were going to do this or that, and it's not fun for everybody, and it certainly isn't what some people who classically come to watch a role-play game are wanting to watch, so that lack of player collaboration would be if I had been having Strigley as a player and did not turn to him and say, what's your feeling about this? Do we need to move this on or whatever? So, not giving an option, or not giving, at least not giving awareness that they are at the table is a problem. And if you are turning down collaboration alternatives from the players session over session over session, they're simply not going to come back. These are all, if I go back and look at every one of these are ways that a player can be caused to want to not to participate. And the final one, and this one is not by any means my highest priority. I want to clarify that these are not in any kind of scale. They're just individual blather points, I guess, for the soapbox. But when you are, as a game master and a storyteller, when you have finished running a storyline and you feel like it's complete, you need to take some time and actually clarify that, because if not, you will lead to burnout. And burnout is when you show up at the session, you call for die rolls, you converse and communicate rulings in between them, between die rolls, or whatever, and you're not involved, you're not continuing, you're not exciting about playing. Yes, exactly, Strigley. You're right. You're trying to invite all of them to participate. And yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point. You're talking about speed on things. We'll get to that in a later video. I'll do an entire video on timing, because that's really, really important. But the second way this can happen for a game master is they have gotten their Jones for whatever the adventure type is, and they're not wanting to do it anymore, so they just check out. They just don't add anything more. I remember a situation where a game master, had written a series of maps, and the players decided to go a different direction. And he didn't have anything planned for that part, so he would say something along the lines of, this is their game master. You come into a room. It is 10 foot by 10 foot. There are exits on all the other walls. There's nothing in the room. You're going the wrong way. And the players would enthusiastically go, great, well, we're going to take the door on the left. And he'd say, you've entered a 10 by 10 room. There are doors on each of the opposite walls. There's nothing in the room. You're going the wrong way. And they would go again and again. And the players thought it was hysterical. The players kept doing it only because they wanted to see if they could break the storyteller out of it. But I think they went through something like 30 doorways like that with him repeating the exact same description because he had checked out. He wasn't part of the story anymore, and he wasn't involved with it. The final way that you can get into trouble as a game master within this concept is the overcommitment. Yeah, so overcommitment is where you have told them that we're going to go on a 9-week saga and we're doing these things, and it took 6 weeks, and you're gotten to a boring or flat part, and you've overcommitted them, and therefore you now feel like you have to continue even though the story is not going where you want to, and it's not even what the direction that you wanted to go. All three of these, burnout, checkout, and overcommitment, are signs that you as a game master need to recharge your cells. A game master who has reached a burnout level simply has done something so long or with so little response that if it's nothing else, maybe the games group itself needs to have a conversation about what's causing it. Now, hopping back to the situation where there's nothing behind the door. Having a big monster behind the door that is hard to fight, only, hey, welcome. Glad to have you with us. Hey, Lo, you're more than welcome to join us in this conversation. I'm on my last point, so it's just going to take me a little bit longer than we can actually have a regular conversation. So the last part here is that burnout, checkout, and overcommitment simply derives from the players not having enough feedback to the game master to let him know where they are. Because if the players, hey, you're a player. Most of us are. I'm one of the rare ones, and that's only because I've been doing it for 50 years. So you get past the point of being able to play it at some points, and I'll get to that in another video. But I just wanted to get through that last point, and so the issue here is, I'm going to go back over them really quickly. Unbalanced or weighted gameplay. You are making the situation untenable by either falsifying dice rolls, or you're modifying the stats so there's no way the players can win, or conversely that they always win. Either which way, you get into a problem. Restricting gameplay or limiting their audience agency. If you take away from people the idea that they're making decisions in the game, and you make it so that it's more a narrative than what they want to play, they're going to stop. So make sure you keep enough agency and excitement in what the players are doing that you keep it rolling. Communications. If your communications is poor and you're not getting a lot of engagement, practice that. And I'm going to say that when you are doing all of these things. Yes, exactly. And strictly, I know exactly where you are on the evolutionary scale of a game master. That's awesome. So, but in order to handle the 7 deadly sins, you really need to communicate with your players. Find out what they're actually saying. Listen with both ears, as my grandfather would say. Make sure that you are taking in what they say. When you're dealing with these, you need to take a candid look at your own performance. Are you showing too much bias? Are you over-explaining? Are you limiting their opportunities or whatever? And then finally, concentrate on making one change to your game. If you look at the 7 list and you say, oh, I see one in there that fits me, then work on that one particular one. If you see a bunch of them that do, pick one. Because when you work on one of these changes, you'll find that the game overall changes. So you definitely want to push the alternatives to the players so that they can feedback to it, and therefore you can work on that one issue and check it for a few weeks before you try a different one. So That will conclude that part of this broadcast. I'm going to be staying here on Twitch and conversing with my associates that are online with me, and we will see you again next time. This is Jonathan Albin with the 7 Deadly Sins of a Storyteller, which is this week's Gamemasters Soapbox. See you next time. All right. So, yes, Strigley, I get the point that you are the 3 times the session, planning the session. That is a situation that can be that will fix itself over time, because as you plan and plot more, then the world that you are defining will start to come into focus, and when it does, then the amount of time you have to plan and project can fall away, because you'll already have those pieces on lock. You'll already be able to get back at them. So the question you have about not to over prep, the first thing is to realize that, say, oh yeah, okay, so that's good. So, okay, you've got a framework, you've got the module that was intended. And if you've read through the module, you know what they kind of really wanted to say. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. The reality is that until such time as you take ownership, it's not a homebrew. Every game master is going to run the game differently. So even if you started tomorrow and you ran from the module, rules as written, but you had your own idea of what you wanted to do, then you have stuff that can be added to it. But it does not change the fact that you're running the module. You're just amplifying it. And that's not truly, if you will, the concept of homebrew. You're trying to figure out information. Yes. Writing character descriptions by themselves are difficult. So here's one of the things to realize when you're playing a role-play game. If you're a player, I'm going to talk about this from Fatal Gaming. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Is that right? Fatal Gaming? If so, then let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go with that. So Fatal Gaming, if you're worried about your backstory, realize that the purpose for the backstory is actually not for you as a player. The purpose of a backstory is to give the game master something prickly to work with in order to massage you into the story and to wrap the story around you. So the idea of creating a really big character backstory, and you want to fill it all out, that is the purpose of roleplay. The imagination, the amount of effort you're putting into it, is exactly what you need to bring to the table. So I always recommend that players, instead of writing a huge backstory, write 1 line of text. I was an orphan, as an example. That is prickly. A game master can fit all kinds of things into it. Were you an orphan because you were left by somebody rich and powerful? Are you an orphan because the economy is bad and therefore there's something to fix in the government? These are all ways that the backstory is only really what the game master needs. So when you build a large backstory, you're building what players do over years. I can tell you that in all the years I've been game mastering, one of the biggest turnoffs, if you will, to other people learning about roleplay games is the fact that a role player gets so enthusiastic about what his character was, he tries instead to make that he wants to tell the story of his character, and so when he does that, now he's switched into what was classically known as the 16th level paladin story. So that's I understand what you're saying about the backstory fixing personality, but personality actually derives from personability. So when you play with another group of people, if you have a guideline for what you want to do, like I said, if you're playing an orphan, maybe you are playing with a chip on your shoulder. Maybe you've got insecurity issues. Maybe you've got doubts and whatever. Those are all things you can play into, certainly. But it's up to you and the game master to bring your character into the story. And when you spend 10 pages explaining backstory, where you lived, where you came from, what your favorite foods are, who you kind of like, what kind of monsters you want to fight, these are all things that can be done narratively in a few minutes in-game and have far more meaning because the players in the group can also feel like they're engaged to it. Hey, I'm okay with discussing your character's backstory. I don't need you to post all 10 pages or 10 paragraphs. That's fine. But you're starting a character at level 3. That does change things a bit. You see it from my table experience. I require players to always start um, with level 1. But as far as the comment you strictly just made that it has to be open ended. Most definitely. If you build a story that is 10 paragraphs long and closes off all of the loopholes because you've solved all the problems in the character's background to this point, then you've taken away, again, the agency of the game master to make the story make sense to you or to draw you into it. So leave open ends. Usually, my recommendation is, as I said, a single sentence that catches what you want to say. So if you wanted more, like let's say you didn't just want to be an orphan in this example, you wanted to be an orphan who has nothing, that was left literally with a blanket around his back. Sure, you were a destitute foundling. Good. That's enough, because I, as a game master, can now start chewing on how a foundling got into this story and why that happened 20 years ago, or however old your character is, and figure out how to bring you into it. And maybe this will help. One of the things that I've developed in running roleplay games is the concept of the injunction. And the injunction isn't so much a reality, but a contractual agreement between myself and the players. And that injunction is this: the character that they create, the numbers that they roll to come up with the persona they're going to play, is itself not a created being. In other words, it doesn't spawn like a video game out of nothing into existence. It was actually born, lived, and died in the adventure world. So the pieces that a player brings, the pieces that a player brings to the table are their interpretations of what that persona is. But when they start playing, the persona that they are playing literally already existed. What this does, therefore, is it makes it so that when a player steps away from the table, either they have to be gone for a week or whatever, their persona is still in the game. He's still in the world, and as a matter of fact, he may have his own agenda. He may have his own friends. He might have actually had a job before, and now you've taken him away from his job. These are all things that might happen with a persona being built as a character. And so the shorter or the lower of the threshold for the game master to have to leap to bring you into the story is better. So yeah, the more generic, like your sister is missing, do we know if it's a legitimate sister or is it a half sister? Do you even know they exist? How do you why do you know they exist or whatever? Or what is a document? I would shy away from having personal affronts built in, because a personal affront in the game then can be conveyed indirectly or accidentally onto a player or to an NPC without provocation, and that's not necessarily useful. So I would always try to keep it to being a definition of who the character is and how they got to be there. Maybe there was something that was stolen from you, and it was never recovered or whatever. But don't have to make it something too major. Or conversely, you can make it major. So the whole point is that the game master has to choose what the answers are to the questions that you build. So a character backstory doesn't have to be 10 paragraphs if the... Okay, here we go. Okay, so you are now being player and game master. If you don't realize it, that background stuff that you just put down, you would have been able to say it was a crazy person took your sister or whatever, and that would have been all you needed. The game master could fill the rest of those details in. The more you put the details in, the less that gives for the game master to work with. Yeah, you don't have to fill in all of the gaps. You can leave mysteries as you go. It doesn't, because you're only dealing with what your player is holding as his core values. The backstory is, for lack of a better term, it is a backbone. It is a frame upon which you're hanging the meat of your adventure. Sure, Sure. That summary is all you need. I wouldn't. The other 7 paragraphs you don't need. You got the pieces right there. That is your backstory. You don't have to go any more than that, because now as a game master, we'll have to pick up on, okay, who is Percival? What language were you speaking in? Does that still exist? They owned a shop, but how do you know it went to crap? Maybe somebody bought it. Maybe there was a competitor who was involved. Maybe they were tied together and they were actually intentionally trying to drive your family crazy. So there's all kinds of meat on the bones there, but you don't have to do any of the meat placement if you get what I'm saying. And the more you do, the more you fill in those gaps, the more you tie those pieces together, the more of a narrator you've become. And so now, fundamentally, if you're to this point in character development, then you should write a short story. You should write a novel about this character's backstory, because that is itself the framework for a book. Because the very mystery of that is its own thing, but it's not a playable role-play environment because you've closed off all of the outside access points for the game master to play with. So pumping up a backstory is not necessary. As a matter of fact, the best backstories, like I said, that I've ever run into have been 1 or maybe 2 lines of text that leave all kinds of room for the game master to work, you know? I'm looking for my mop. If I'm looking for my mop, why am I looking for a mop? What happened? What is this story of my mop? How did that fit into my backstory? I took the hermit class and hermit backstory element, and now my backstory is I'm missing my mop. Okay, so you can have the backstory. Okay, we got 2 different things going on here. So thank you, Fatal, for making that really clear. So Fatal, your purpose of a backstory is not the backstory framework that I'm talking about. The framework that I'm saying for a backstory is you need to have something that the game master can grab a hold of, use to anchor you into the story and draw you into it. Once that happens, then all of your frivolous fluff will now fall to secondary, because what happens in the game will fill in the gaps that you've actually fictionally created out here with your longer descriptive tale. You don't need this for the player. You need this. You don't need this. You don't need all of this for the game master. You need 1 or 2 lines. That's all. You just need the core basis so they can build a story around you. If these pieces that you've created as fluff you feel are absolutely necessary to the background of your character, then you should be the storyteller. Yeah, so if it's fluff, then just realize that that's not the backstory. The backstory is, as you said, the narrative. Although your narrative has good places for crunchiness, just I wouldn't put as many details in. I would leave them go. Like you put in the name Parsifal. Why? You like the name Parsifal? You want that story name to come up? You tell the game master that as a separate thing. By the way, here's a cool name. I think we could have this as a good hero or a nemesis. What do you think? Parsifal. And just go with that. It does not have to be part of your backstory. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, because when the fluff is in there, the game master has to then chew over the fluff to try to determine how much of it is substance and how much of it's sound. And you need to shorten that. For play purposes, your narrative needs to only be very short, terse a bit. So that will help your game master to avoid the mistakes in this list, because these can come up directly from that. I like reading you guys' text. I'm going to sit here and watch you guys go. Okay, so now let's talk about something else. This is not something that you'll find in Dungeons and Dragons. In theater, they call them liner notes. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is in addition to the script, that an actor gets for the performance, they will get a liner notes section. And so the liner notes are what the actor needs to get into character. Now, some people are character actors, so they step into the role and they are focused as that character and they stay in it. The myth, the backstory about Heath Ledger and the Joker was that he got so involved as a method actor that he was becoming that persona, even when he's off screen, and he had a hard time shutting it down. The idea of method acting is one process, but even with that, normally the writer or the creator has liner notes. And this is, I think, what you're looking for when you're talking about the character and the actions you're going to take as the player, as the character in the story. This is what will help you out, and that's to have your own version of the liner notes. And it doesn't have to be the full fluff. It could be if you want, but it could be just trigger points. If someone talks about this, I'm going to be responding with that. If this is what these kind of terms make me angry. I don't like goblins. I'm allergic to sheep. Whatever. This list of things gives you as the player the mechanisms that you want for your character development. So I think that might be what you might want to consider, is that when I'm talking about the backstory, I'm talking about what Strigley and I are both referring to is the information that a game master needs to plug your character into the story, and the more prickly that is, the more enmeshed we can make you with the story. Because having done that, it gives the game master, as Strigley says, plenty to use. There's levers and triggers that I can use to drive the story. In like fashion, you as a player would need your liner notes. If I'm in a city, how do I feel about populations? Do I do well in crowds? Do I have a problem with people named Phil? What if Parsifal is a trigger word for me and somebody happens to mention the name and I go crazy? So these are all things that you could take into it. Does that make more sense? Exactly the opposite. Yep. Nope. The backstory is what the game master needs. What you're asking about is something that you only can create for yourself. And I only know a couple people that even know this secret. So on this broadcast, there's only 2 of you, so it's our secret right now. But the reality is I'm going to have to do an entire video on liner notes, because this, I found, is really useful for players to stay within the consistency of the character they're trying to develop. Sure. And the irony is that it's the opposite for the game master. The game master wants as few interaction points at the beginning as possible, so that I can leverage the story that I'm building so that you fit into it. If you give me a really, really large, fluffy pile of backstory, as a game master, I'm now daunted, because I now have to go back through my storyline, my theme, and see where I might be able to connect into something that was sort of left scratchy. So the trick is just to make it short, make it interesting, and make it challenging, but don't close it all off. Right. Strictly what I'm getting at is that's actually the pieces you want to add for your own benefit actually needs to be almost a separate document, because the Yeah. So I just wanted to explain it, because Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have this, and most roleplay games don't have this, because most roleplay games are far less involved with the roleplay as they do with the mechanical game. And I know that's going to be a revelation to some, but the game master's part in it is to be both a judge, jury, executioner, but also a narrator, exposition engine, if you will, and adjudicator. That's it. He's just got to play those parts. If he is given something that's big and expansive and detailed, then he has to recreate what he had in his head, so that the pieces that you put together are not internally inconsistent. There you go. There you go. Keep what you wrote for your purpose. That, like I said, that sounds like liner notes. That's great. Including that as part of your backstory. It's like this. Okay, think of the backstory as being the elevator pitch. I don't know if you're aware of this concept, but the idea was back in the day, salespeople had a real hard time getting appointments. But they knew that they could catch the person they were trying to sell something to on the elevator. They could say something so compelling in that short period of time that that person would then set an appointment for them. These were called the elevator pitch. The backstory that the Game Master requires is your elevator pitch. He doesn't want to have all the details. He doesn't need all the fluff. He just needs to know basic things that are going to make you interesting enough to put the details of the story around you. So yes, keep your notes. That's your what I call the opposite of that is your cocktail party story, and that's where you want to tell a story or reveal something about yourself in a way that it's protected. Use that to do your cocktail party story. So they're two different things. So elevator pitch, flat to the point, quickly as hell. Get the game master to be able to wrap his brain around it. Cocktail party story, the fluff and drama and excitement that you can get other players to want to know about your character. So therefore, you have a cocktail party story. Yes, you do. It sounds like the way just that one summary paragraph, that was almost the elevator pitch. I would actually drop out the actual names. I would leave all of the lines that ended in a mystery, leave those, and take out the ones where you were trying to answer the questions, and let the game master figure out how to build the questions around there. Now, there's a warning to that, and that is if you go with that direction and you give the game master stuff, the story that you tell, your cocktail story, will change over time because the things that happen in game will start to replace the ones that they will become the truth, if you will, over what you had written in the fluffy story that you built for yourself. And that's reality because we don't know what's going to happen in the game. We don't have the script. We're not writing a play here, so we have no idea what's going to happen. So that's fine. Okay, notice Parsifal as a criminal contact, that's actually something you as a player choose. If you have the criminal background, it gives you a criminal contact and you can describe him. But when you describe him, you have to let the game master know what you built for him, and you got to leave the rest to him. So maybe Parsifal is the name of your contact, but maybe the game master has him going as Lucky Slim. So the rest of the world he's Lucky Slim, but you know him as Parsifal. Your code got used. You got to put in your piece to it. But that piece doesn't mean that necessarily the game master is going to grab all of it. So just realize that to me, that's what the way I would approach it is I'd say, here's all of this information, and oh, by the way, I have a criminal background. Criminal background lets me pick one contact, and I'd like that contact to be a guy named Parsifal. I want him to be blah, 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 blah. And then the game master figures out how to work that out. That's far, far easier than doing the whole thing and then, oh, by the way, I need to know somebody named Parsifal. So I hadn't realized that's what you're speaking of. So yes, Strigley, that is the wonders of the English language. If you want a proof of example, it's a hard read, but go read Herman Melville's Moby Dick. He wrote that in a period of time where there were no typewriters, and therefore he had to use extremely proficient sentence structure. And so he utilizes parenthetical phrasing, he uses sentence structure gymnastics to convey information in very, very few words. You can read a paragraph and feel like your brain's exploding because the intensity of what he's saying is actually tenfold what the actual word length would reflect. Yep, Strigley's got it right. Yeah. Strigley speaking truth tonight. We should have a section called Strigley Speaks and Strigley Speaking. There we go. You could do my videos as a complete other video and analyze them, Strig. You could there you go. There's a way you can draw attention to your videos by doing commentaries on mine. That would be awesome. I would love those. I'd put those on my watch list too. So that's really, really good. So so Fatal Gaming in the long version, which we already did TLDR. Let's go with the short version. Short version is you've built a great story for your character for descriptive purposes. To make it a good backstory, strip it down to the skeleton and put in only the parts that you absolutely want the Game Master to use, and then let the rest fall to the story to fill in the difference. And over time, what will happen, you'll find, is that your cocktail story will start to do not only what you saw in your past as part of your preview, but actually what happens in the story, which was your actual life. Therefore, by the time your character's been around for 3 or 4 levels, even the cocktail party version of the story is all what happens in game. Because ultimately, the pre-story only is necessary if you're writing the novel of your character. So I think that would be awesome to be able to put those two together, and I'm glad I was able to get to the meat of that. Thank you for sticking with me on that one. Is there, now that we kind of handled that conversation, what would you guys like to talk about next? Anything in particular from what we talked about today as far as the seven deadly sins? Maybe you know of a game master who suffers from some of these. Maybe you have some of these yourself. What would you like to talk about next? Oh, and Fatal, you don't know this about me, but as a game master on the California West Coast, I love to find out where people are from. If I remember, Strigley's from the other side of the world, literally. He's getting up when I'm going to bed, and going to bed when I'm getting up, pretty much. What part of the world are you from? Ah, there we go. I've got a lot of good friends are from Canada, and yeah. Time. We're gonna talk about time. Okay. Time in what context? Time that the game master puts into his game. Time as a tool in game. How to handle passages of time. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Pacific Coast. Very good. Very good. You don't understand. A game master takes words and turns them 1,000 ways. So yes, no, I'm in Pacific Coast time. I'm out here literally on the edge of the world. A place called San Bernardino. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Alaska standard. Okay. So you're in the west part. Cool. You're even farther western from me. Yeah, I do these broadcasts in what's considered to be a late night time slot here on the West Coast. Yeah, it's only midnight for me. But I'm a writer and a novelist in addition to being a professional game master, so I get paid to write, so I don't have a standard work schedule. Matter of fact, when I get off the air here, I'm going to go and finish my project for the week. So here we go. Okay, so great. Wow, you're 4 in the morning. Yep. Wow. Okay, so one of the players. Oh, you're East Coast. You said I saw AST. I thought that was Alaska Standard. You're Eastern time zone. Gotcha. Because they're 4 hours behind us. All right. So This is a great question. Thank you, Strigley. When one of the players cast Charm on a Myconid, you granted the ability of that spell to affect the Myconid, but then you went back and looked and saw that Myconids weren't humanoid. So no, you can't reverse yourself. If a rule has gone down, you could say years from now mention it and say, yeah, boy, you got away with a good one there. But no. Here's what I would do, and this is how extremely I think. If a Myconid was affected by a spell and it's the first time the players have engaged with the Myconids, as of now, Myconids are included in the humanoid characteristic. So I would write that in pen into my monster manual. Because you allowed it, you must have thought it was okay, ergo they must therefore be of that type. So I would change the rule. I wouldn't change the condition, I would change the rule, because you are establishing a fact, if you will, in the game. Now, simply making it so that he was a Myconid who was transformed from a human, you could argue, if you wanted to, that it was his human byproduct, a human root, that allowed it. And therefore you could make that case. But if you do, then it's on specious grounds and they might use it against you later. So I would just simply say that it is now, Myconids are now humanoid. I see them as such anyway. As a matter of fact, I've had some people arguing that I should allow them to become playable, because in my system, the characters that are the villains in one campaign generally end up being allies or friends in the next campaign. And it's just the way the arc works. So, well, that's true too. Maybe the wild magic was just wild magic. It doesn't matter. It's how much work you want to do. To me, I think that it's a matter of why it needed to not work in the first place. You just realize this is something that most game masters don't know, and it's not written explicitly in any of the DM's guides or anything that I've ever seen. But I wrote it into the NycosRPG as an actual rule. And if you listen carefully to this one, it will change everything for you. No dice roll is ever a requirement. You don't, as a game master, you don't ever have to roll a dice if you don't want to, because it's the story you're creating. Now, from the player standpoint, that'd be pretty much untenable, because the players want to feel agency and they want to feel like at least they had a shot. So saying no to all of the dice rolls isn't what I'm meaning. What I'm saying is that if you needed an effect, which is what you described, you said you had an effect coming up, so it shouldn't have worked, although I allowed it at the time. Should I go with it? Avoiding a skill challenge. So I would have still made the skill challenge, is what I'm getting at. Charm the Myconid, make your attempt. Okay. While you're attempting that, everybody else make your skills check. They can happen at the same time. If you want the skills check requirement, make the skills check. You don't have to have a die roll to choose that. You don't have to make it predicated on an action of a player. So, yeah, okay. You spent ages planning the skill challenge and it didn't happen. I'm not sure what you refer. If you were saying that you have a skill, a clever puzzle you want put together, and the players have to come up with this by a skills reaction, then that's a determinant, and therefore you need to have that happen, whether or not the monster gets controlled by the magics or affected by the charm or whatever. Oh, okay. So, this is a really great point. 3 successes convincing the NPC they were friendly before they reached 3 fails. So you were doing a death save mechanic, using the death save mechanic on a conversant NPC. And so in this case, the NPC, I take it, was the Myconid, yes? I want to make sure that's right. You're using dice to determine the outcome. If you want that, okay. Therefore, so here's something else. When you talk about control magics, specifically charm person makes them affable. It doesn't mean they become stupid. They still have a job to do. They still have an obligation to be the guards. So charming them, great. Congratulations, you've now made him your best buddy. He's really glad you're here. But buddy, you know the rules. I still need to be convinced. Go ahead and make your rolls. Maybe even make it so that he gets to make his 3 rolls, but you're still dependent upon the rest to make the others. Just realize that when you are faced as a game master with a problem, the problem is never based on what the players do. It has to be something that you make a decision about. Because if it's not, then it's not a story that you're game mastering, you're only being a judge. This is one of the reasons why I get into it when I have people that come on who are game masters, who are full advocates for the sandbox and come down on the concepts of the world of Nykos because it has a story arc. Sure. As a matter of fact, that would work because when the next Myconid walks in, the one that you've had them make friends with is now beckoning on their part. So maybe you give him an extra one of the dice to roll or whatever, so that he also has to help convince them because now he's on your side. But now that only works on the one because you don't know why. Maybe he had some human genetics or whatever. If you're wanting to go with this, then that's what you do. It's now I'm worked on the one, can't do it again. So yeah, if the issue is the contest must be 3 successes over 3 fails, but I will hazard you a warning. If you do that and they do not succeed, do not punish them. And what I mean by that is the players are attempting to do something that you want to see happen in game. You want them to feel that challenge. Oh crap, we got to convince this guy. Oh crap, we've got to fail. Oh no, we've got only one left to go. If they do a complete failure, yes, there should be a fight. There should be a conflict. Just realize that the turn of that positioning doesn't have to be as detrimental as you might think. But here's what I'm getting at. You can now convince one Myconid. If you make it so they have to do that 3-roll mechanism, each one that they win over, even if it's by subterfuge like the charm person was, they still have to get to a majority. Yeah, if they attack, I get that they're going to attack, but if they attack, they're fighting with one less of them because the Myconid that you made friends with is now going to be not fighting because he's on your side. He won't join you because charm person doesn't work that way. You can't turn him against his cultural planning. But you will reduce the amount of enemies they have to face. Oh, just the caster. Absolutely just the caster. That's why I was saying it does not change the fact that they have to do the convincing. You're okay. You can go on by, but the rest of you, no. Come on, tell me more. I need to hear my 3 out of 3. Come on. If their tables are leveraged, which they would be, they're probably going to make it eventually. But it is going to be a bit of a contest and a challenge. And it might go to a fight, but at least it'll be one Myconid less. You've already balanced out that player, so that player doesn't get involved. Furthermore, if that player does turn on the rest of the Myconids, it breaks the charm. Because you cannot go against that person's wishes any more than you would want them to go against yours, because you would be messing with their psychology. And therefore, they'd have to go friend of friend versus friend of foe, and it would just cause a disconnect. So also realize that the charm spells are not nearly as powerful as they once were, because it used to be you were stuck for days, and if you had high charisma, you could actually keep somebody on the chain for months based on die rolls. It was a brutally powerful low-level spell, but nowadays they get a save at the end of each turn after the end of their initial duration. So if it's a 1-hour spell, at the end of that hour, they get to make rolls every round. So it's not nearly as clunkily powerful as it used to be. But as a DM, knowing how to have the charms be Ah, gotcha. Okay, so just realize that. Yeah, no, I get you. Uh, you have to. There's a skill that you develop when you are doing public speaking, where you have to kind of read the crowd. You have to read what you're conveying is what you're conveying being heard and responded to appropriately. So okay, so here's the question. When they cast, they say I want to cast charm. Ask them what they think the charm is going to do. You can say, this charm effect is going to count as one of your successes, but you still have two more to go. So just realize that that's just an auto success. It's kind of like a magic missile automatically hitting its target. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to kill anything, but you certainly get an automatic hit. So yeah, if you want to use your charm, you can do that. And if you do that, then this will be the potential ramification. But ask them what they're trying to do with it, because if they are intentionally trying to derail the situation because they think that they can't overcome it, then they have no confidence in the other players and they have no confidence in you as a game master. So you need to reestablish that. So ask them what it is they are expecting or what they think it will be. Because when a player reads the description of a spell, they don't always read with open eyes. And what I mean by that is I know many players go to look in their list of spells and they pick one that goes, oh no, you're right. You're right. You can't put the horse back inside the pen. You can't close the door in the barn. No, you're right. You have to go with what you got there. So I would definitely, since apparently it hasn't resolved yet, just have them walk past the first room and now have to pass the test when they go into the group of 5. Far harder. I'd make that okay. You got to succeed 5 times against 3 fails. Because you've already got one Myconid acting strangely because he's somehow now a friend of this group. Or conversely, you make it easier because he's going to be the one yes as soon as they walk in the door because he's going, hey buddies, check this out, and not at all afraid of the group because of that one ally. Or like I said, you make it so the wizard goes out. He's able to pass right on through because he's been given the go ahead, but the others aren't. And so when they go into the next room, the guy says, yeah, I let him through, but I'm not letting any of you through. You got to convince these guys. Maybe it's a rite of passage. Maybe each one of them has to convince a Myconid. Your friend, your wizard just bypassed one of the tests. Mwahaha. Sure. And then then that actually, the irony there would make it so, that actually works out kind of gracefully. Because when they come walking in saying, hey, what the hell's going on here? The charmed one now has to be the one to convince. Right. Yeah, either one of those would work. Either one of those would work. So that looks like he chased off Fatal. Down to you, Strigley. Yeah, no worries. This is what I actually have a Gamemaster level in my Patreon where you actually get this service on a monthly basis or even all the time. So, you are here. Oh, that's weird. My viewers only show one. You guys are being mysterious. So, cool. Glad that you're still here. Thought we chased you off. No, you never talk too much. You just listen too well. I'm not. Yeah, I got you. Oh, I definitely would be glad for you to repost everything or share every post that I do. That'd be awesome. The more the merrier. The more eyeballs I can get to, the better off. I do know that with as many years behind the screen as I have, there are dozens and dozens of game masters that are twisting out there because they would Oh, sure. You can feel free to ask more questions. I don't mind I'm taking on multiple targets. As a matter of fact, that's what one of the skills that I have in my background that is not commonly known is that I'm a former air traffic controller. And so when you are an air traffic controller, you're having to resign. I do, but it's at NycosRPG on Twitter. I just don't post on Twitter much. So does that help? You can always tweet the YouTube page also. You just grab the. Oh no! Yikes! Okay, I'll definitely get on that. I didn't know that was an issue. Yikes! I thought I already fixed that by still saying Nycos D&D. Go back and look. That is weird. Oh, there you go. What? Let me go see. I haven't been on Twitter in a long time. I used to have it so it auto posted, so that might be what happened as it fell out. All right, so there you go. It's at Nycos D&D, DND. I haven't changed it. It was the original one that was set up for the account when I started live streaming. So we set it up at Nycos D&D on Twitter. So. Yep. So. I will go ahead and get that changed when I get offline today. I'll go and mess with it. Get all my settings corrected. Didn't realize it was still on there as that. Hang on just a second. I gotta grab some. It works where I thought it would. Why is it doing that? That's weird. Oh well, I'll get to that later. So okay, so the thing with your backstory fatal is that you answer questions. You should instead create questions. Like, my folks lost their shop. Why? My sister died. How? During the heist of magic, I found Parsifal. Who is he? I went insane. What insanity did I get? Somebody promised to bring your sister back. Why? And who took your parents? And these should all end with questions. The more you take away from the storyteller in your backstory, the more armored you become and the less useful for storytelling. A person is interesting because of the mysteries he creates. James Kirk in his commentary, I need my pain. Pain is what defines us. Same thing true is here. I need the mysteries. Mysteries are what define us. I was reading an article the other day, or rather I saw a video on it the other day, that there's a discussion over how the brain functions, and one of the things that we as human beings want is unsolved puzzles. The reason why we love murder mysteries, why we're fascinated with unknown factors of the past and such, is that our brains crave dopamine, and we receive dopamine when we start to ponder on what the possible answers could be. But ironically, they don't get improved when they're solved. When we actually solve the mystery, it's kind of a letdown because we're not getting the dopamine anymore. So the trick is to always leave more questions that you have answered. And if you look at our culture and our history, that's exactly what happens with humanity. Why do we look at atomic structure? Because we didn't understand how physical world worked. Once we could look down to the subatomic level, we started worrying about what the subatomic particles are made out of. So we looked even further. Then we went down to electron microscope, and then we went to quantum theory. We're always looking for ways to come up with better questions because it's in the questioning that our brain stays active. So the GM, the storyteller, wants to know what makes you so prickly. What makes you create so many mysteries. You know, if you started off with, my sister was kidnapped, and you never said anything beyond that, there's at least a mystery. But if you say she's returned, oh, okay, that one's shut down. So then you're going to go on this heist. What's the heist going to be? That's a question by itself. But then you say, oh, it's for magical armor. Oh, so that shuts it down. You see what I'm saying? So every door you're opening, you're closing. So just make sure you leave them open instead. Right, right. You got it. You guys are. I'm sitting on the sideline, adjudicating. I'm the game master. You two are talking about this in game. All right. So, for example, we had a mystery. Mystery was what happened to my Twitter account. Now we know that I've got the wrong one listed. So, just got to go back and change that. Fun stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, let me look here. Where did it go? Alrighty, so they've updated it. So if you refresh your screen, you'll see the right account number now there. So no, you're seeing. You're okay. Fatal gaming. You're actually answering the questions. We're saying why they should not be answered. Why does it have to be magical armor? Where did that information come from? You have to you have to you have to couch it so that there's still the questions. So if you think about it, Fatal, in a way, what you're doing is exactly what a game master does. You're coming up with the question, but the question's bothering you so much that you're going ahead and solving it. But when you do that, you take away from the game master his part of the job. So you're pushing yourself farther up the storyline with more stuff in front that's already been resolved that the game master can't unpack. So that's the reason why we're railing on leaving it at the question stage. So I'm not saying to get rid of what you've done, but like I said, I do agree that this is much better as a cocktail party story, not necessarily a backstory. So in other words, you don't have to go so far backward either. So if what you really want is the last question you're asking, then keep only that question. Why did the guy promise my sister back? How will that happen? So that's why. That just the solving. Now you don't. Right. Yeah, exactly. You're right. But the original line says that you lost your shop when you were too young. Right. So just don't answer them. I'd be really happy with my players if they gave me a list of questions. My sister died. My family lost their farm. There's a hole in my bucket. Tommy doesn't like me. That's my backstory. Because then I get to figure out what the answers to those questions are and how to give you a checklist as a player towards getting those accomplished. Just give the open ended. No, don't even bother with the other definitions of the backstory because that is narrative based and you've already narrated it, so you already know the pieces that you don't have to tell. So I would just strip it down to just the questions. Because when you first read that entire paragraph off, I didn't see that you had left this many questions. If you have this many questions, just leave the questions. Honestly. It seems crazy, but if you say I'm a hermit and here's why, and then you give a list of questions that are unanswered, it explains you just went back into hiding because you didn't want to know, and now that you're no longer going to be a hermit, and you're going to be a character in a story. Now you want to get those answers. Cool. No, I would say my parents lost their shop. Period. My sister died trying to save me. Stop. Percival is my contact. Period. I went insane for a while. Period. I don't know how a gun shows up promising your sister. So is it a magical gun? What do you mean by gun? I thought it was a guy. I thought maybe it was a typo. And just leave it that way and just say these are the statements, and then after each one I'd add the word why. I thought so too. I thought he meant a hired gun. Yeah. So how did the gun promise your sister's life back mechanically? That's a question. Okay, it's a gun with a note. That's fine. Just leave the gun with the note to the game master. I know who killed your sister. That's all it has to say. But leave that to the game master. Don't fill in that detail. You have to think for half a second. You have to think like a storyteller, not like a player. Yes. So going back to your original, the way you wrote it, the short version is not really short because it leaves too many closed loops. You didn't. You needed to leave. My sister died mysteriously. My parents lost their shop inexplicably. We were trying to steal some unknown magic armor. I have the name Percival for my contact, but I don't know who he is. They put me into a hospital for being insane, but I don't know why. One day I found a gun on my desk, promising with a note that promised my sisters were coming back. When I tried to go back to my parents, I found that they were missing. Now the doctors tell me I suffer from PTSD. That way, it's always leaving a mystery, always leaving something for the game master to grab and create. Alrighty, so we're coming up on 1 o'clock. I'm about done for my time online tonight. Thank you for the follow, Fatal. Make sure if you get a chance, go over and check out my YouTube channel, which is also at NycosRPG. And I've got tons of material there. And this is only a part of a series that I've been doing for a while. So there's like 40 episodes of Gamemaster Soapbox. So I wanted to thank you both for the great conversation and for watching the video. And I will see you guys again tomorrow. I'm on every night at 11 p.m. At 9 p.m. also, I am doing a separate series that are called Session Zero Chronicles, which is basically backstory on the NycosRPG so that a player can basically pick up and run characters in my own games whenever they want to and have a lot of lore and background. And so that'll be perhaps useful for you in your own games to possibly pick up some new NPC types and species and such. So I want to thank you again for the conversation.